I'm going to say, I have to start by saying how much I appreciate Jim Matthews. He doesn't know I'm going to do this, because if I'd asked for permission, he might have said no. Jim and I have worked together here in some capacity for a while, and when I first met Jim, and this is not a slight on him at all, my first impression wasn't, I bet me and this guy are going to be fast friends. Like, he's a nice guy, we won't ask Jim for his first impressions of me. You just keep that microphone off, buddy. But I found in Jim just an incredible partner, a great friend. One of my favorite things about Jim is that he is always down for lunch. The number of times, how many times do you suspect, if you had to guess, that we've had lunch? It's hundreds, right? Like, I don't think ever one of us has walked into the other person's office and said, hey, you want to do lunch? No, let's just stay here. And that time has just been so incredibly valuable for me. I really, really deeply appreciate Jim's passion and his heart for ministry and the encourager that he is. And I said I have to start out that way because now I had to tell you there's something about Jim and I that's very different. Very different. We're very different people, Jim and I. And if I had to sum up one of the big differences between Jim and I, as I was thinking about it this week, two kind of phrases came to mind. They're kind of common wisdom, colloquial wisdom. If I was going to define or describe part of, this is not everything about who Jim is, but part of Jim's personality, you might know this, the phrase that came to mind was, the best things in life are free. Because Jim is many things, and one of those things is he is the king of the deal. Somebody said coupons, I heard it. The king of coupons. The number of times I've heard Jim say, I had a coupon, and he smiles. The smile that he does, I'm getting all these nods. The smile that you see come out of Jim when he says the sentence, I had a coupon, is unlike any other, but he just loved it. I love the clock in his office and the story behind it. It's his first deal. When he clipped all of it, was like gathered all the receipts or whatever it was for the sales in his parents' store. That's a part of who Jim is. I love it. Jim has a stack of super books. He's always got all this. He was like, I got a coupon for this. And he just start shuffling through, which is great. But Jim and I are very different people. Jim is appalled sometimes at how often I pay full price for things. He's like, you didn't even try, man. And if the phrase that made me think of Jim, or the phrase that came to mind this week was, the best things in life are free. Mine is, you get what you pay for. It's just kind of how, I don't need a lot of things, but if there's something that I do need, I want to get a good one. You got to get the best one. You got to make sure that it's going to be the right. I beat on those things. I'm very cruel to them. You got to get a good one, because if you just get a cheap one, it would fall apart. So Jim, maybe we should connect. Jim, next time you see a coupon for a guitar, you just let me know, okay, buddy? We might be able to work this out yet. So we'll come back around to why that makes any sense in a minute. We're starting a new series today. We talked, and you've heard us say this before, but it's worth the reminder. Our mission at Lakeshore, and Jim alluded to it before, is that we exist as a church to develop committed Christ followers. That's what we're about. If you're here and you are growing closer to Jesus, you're looking more like Jesus every day, then we're doing what we're here to do. We're accomplishing what we're here to accomplish, because that's what we're here for. We're not just here so that we can see some people and hang out and enjoy each other's company. That's a perk for sure. But the purpose of this congregation, the reason we exist, is to develop committed Christ followers who want people to look more like Jesus than they looked like when they got here. That's what we exist for. And we also kind of introduced the idea several weeks ago, this idea of Vision 360. And Jim talked about it a little bit. We had a whole series several weeks ago that we want to be Christ followers. We want to be disciples, not just in one area of our life. It's not just check the box on Sunday morning. It's not just, can you be a good Christian from 10:36 or whenever you walk in until 11:30 something. We'll see how long this goes. And then you go off and do whatever. but what does it look like to be a disciple in all areas of your life? We had all those doors up here, you might remember. What's it look like to be a follower of Jesus at home with your family? What does it look like to be a follower of Jesus at work with your employees or your coworkers or your customers? What does it look like to be a follower of Jesus with your neighbors and the other relationships that you have? What's it look like to be a disciple with your stewardship, with your time and with your money? What does it look like to be a disciple? I'm going to forget at least one of them. In your kind of private life, in your own kind of in your mind, in the places no one else sees. What's it look like to be a disciple when you're kind of just relaxing or resting? I think I got all 6. I'm very pleased with myself. It's just, I didn't even write them down. I could have. But what does that look like? What does it mean to be a committed Christ follower in all those areas, not just one? And we want to challenge, encourage everybody here to continue to think about what that means, what that looks like for you. And so that brings us to this next 4 weeks, and we'll lead into more stuff this summer. But the idea of next steps. The important question of all of that, all those doors we had up here, every time we repeat the mission that we exist to develop committed Christ followers, the big question that I want everyone to ask every time they hear that is, what do I need to do next? What is the next step for me? Because one of the interesting things we'll find out about being a disciple is you can't just turn into one and then stay the same. There's always a next step. There's always another thing. There's always more to do. There is a cost. Here's the deal. The good news, the gospel of Jesus, and Jim talked about it, is that Christ has offered us, or God has offered us through Christ, the free gift of salvation. Jim loves it. It's free. The best things in life are. There we go. And that is true. And I don't want you to hear me say that there is something you have to do to earn that gift. That is not the point. The gift of salvation, the good news of the gospel is Christ offers us grace and mercy and peace and joy and love and forgiveness for free. But Jesus also says that being a disciple will come at a cost. It's not a cost that you pay him, but there is a cost. There's a price for following Jesus. So I'm going to pray, and then we're going to look at just a couple scriptures, a couple stories. One's in the Gospel of Luke, one is in the book of 2 Samuel in the Old Testament, and then a little tiny verse, or a couple verses from the book of Revelation, not the real crazy ones. I'll try to keep it under wraps. So I'm going to pray. We're going to look at those things and see where that takes us. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this time. God, I thank you for this place and this community. I just pray this morning that people would be encouraged, first of all, by your goodness, but we would also be challenged to think about this question, what's next? That we would seek your will, your guidance, in asking ourselves that question. God, that we would always be looking for the thing that you have ahead of us, not content to kind of settle in and sit where we are. We thank you for your Son, Jesus Christ. It's in his name we pray. Amen. So in the Gospel of Luke, there's this story, and I'll kind of set the stage for it, kind of whereabouts it is. So in Luke, Jesus travels a lot. In the other Gospels, Jesus kind of wanders around in one small area, and then within the span of a few verses, boom, he's in Jerusalem, and he does things there. In Luke, in chapter 9, about halfway through chapter 9, Jesus starts traveling towards Jerusalem, and he doesn't get there for like 10 or 11 chapters. It takes him a minute. And so this passage, what we're going to look at, it's in Luke 14. It's kind of halfway-ish to Jerusalem. And a lot of stories you might be familiar with from the gospel have already happened. So Jesus has asked his disciples, who do the people say that I am? And Peter says, some say you're Elijah or a prophet. And Jesus says, who do you say I am? And Peter says, well, you're the Messiah, you're the Christ. And then a little bit after that, we have the story of the Transfiguration, which you may have heard that Jesus goes up on the mountain with some of his disciples, and he's transfigured before him. His face kind of glows radiantly, and Moses and Elijah come down and hang out. Peter says something kind of dumb, and then, a lot of those stories are the same. So all those things have happened already. Jesus had already talked a little bit about the cost of discipleship. And it's actually a passage that we looked at a few weeks ago where people are coming to follow after Jesus and he keeps kind of shooting them down, which is always very interesting to me. I don't know if you've ever read, there's a book, I think it's by Craig Groeschel. And I think it's the book Christian Atheist. It could be another one. There's several books that he's written. But he says at the very beginning of that book, I think it's really profound. He says, I am a pastor, he says, at a megachurch. I mean, there's thousands of people at the church. And I'm constantly at a loss for how to handle that. Because my model for leadership, every time there was more than about a dozen people around him, chased them off by saying absolutely insane things like, you must eat my body. So what do I do with that? How do I handle that? Jesus gets surrounded by crowds, and instead of saying, come on in, here's all the perks, what he does is he tells them what it's going to cost. So that happens in several places, but especially here in Luke 14. So let's take a look at what Jesus says here in the middle of Luke chapter 14. It says, large crowds were traveling with Jesus and turning to them. Anytime Jesus has large crowds around him and he turns to speak, just watch out. So he turns to them and he said, if anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brother and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. That shows up in several of the Gospels. Then in Luke, kind of uniquely, we have this. Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost and see if you have enough money to complete it? For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, this person began to build, but wasn't able to finish. Or suppose a king is about to go to war against another king. Won't he first sit down and consider whether he is able with 10,000 men to oppose the one coming after him with 20,000? And if he is not able, he will send a delegation while the other is still a long way off and will ask for terms of peace. In the same way, those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciples. The gospel tells us that Jesus offers us the free gift of salvation, and that is very true. But there is a cost, Jesus says, if you're going to follow him. You will have to give up things that you hold dear. It will disrupt your relationships if you decide to follow Jesus. It will get in the way of living the kind of life you may want to live, the kind of life you have built up around yourself. And can we talk for just a minute about how take up your cross is kind of a crazy thing to ask someone to do? We think of crosses, we have one right in here, and it is a symbol for us in a lot of ways of our faith. It is a reminder of what Jesus does on the cross. It's a beautiful reminder that Jesus defeats the devil with his own tools. But for Jesus to say, take up your cross in the first century is absolutely nuts. Because when Jesus says this, the cross is one thing. It's an instrument of execution for the worst kind of people. Citizens aren't allowed to be crucified. Only rebels, insurrectionists, and slaves. These are the types of people who can be crucified. That's it. And Jesus says, pick up your cross and come after me. That's a cost. This is going to cost something. And he says, you would be wise to consider the cost before you decide to follow. So what is discipleship cost us? What is following Jesus cost me? What if I had to pay? What if I had to give up? What is it disrupted? Has following Jesus cost me something? Or did I just get to the free gift part and decide to stand still before I got into that life transformation stuff, the disruptive bit? There's a cost, Jesus says in Luke, here in chapter 14 and in a couple other places. I want to jump backwards in time a long, long ways and look at a little story from 2 Samuel just to introduce it again. In 2 Samuel chapter 24, David has done something and God is upset. Exactly why God is upset is kind of a little mysterious. God tells David to do something, and David does it in a way that God doesn't like. But David has held a census. He's counted his fighting men. It's probably that it seems like, as you read the story, that David's trying to kind of trust in his own strength, the strength of his armies. And his generals remind him, it doesn't matter how many fighting men we have, God is on our side. And David's like, yeah, count them anyways. God doesn't love that. And so through one of his prophets, he says, David, you've done something very dumb, and you have a choice. Do you want 3 years of famine? Do you want 3, I think it's months, of all of your enemies chasing you all over the place, or 3 days of plague? And David says, that sounds like a terrible choice. Let's go with 3 days of plague. And as the plague begins, and he sits there, and it says he sees the angel of God striking his people with sickness, and he kind of cries out for mercy. He says, look, I'm the shepherd. This is my fault. Don't kill the sheep. This is on me. And so he's told to go and build an altar, and he's on his way to do that. When we get to this portion, he gets to this guy's house named Araunah. And so here what we got in 2 Samuel 24, starting in verse 21. Araunah said, why has my lord the king come to his servant? To buy your threshing floor, David answered, so I can build an altar to the Lord, so that the plague of the people may be stopped. And Araunah says to David, let my lord the king take whatever he wishes and offer it up. Here are oxen for the burnt offering. Here's the threshing sledges, the ox yokes for the wood. Your majesty, Araunah gives, to your majesty, Araunah gives all of this. He said to him, may the Lord your God accept you. And look at what David says. The king replied to Araunah, no, I insist on paying you for it. I will not sacrifice to the Lord my God burnt offerings that cost me nothing. So David bought the threshing floor and and the oxen, and paid 50 shekels of silver for them. That line, go ahead and put it up there. I will not give God something that cost me nothing. It's the other way. It's fine. I will not give God something that cost me nothing. It's the beginning of Romans chapter 12. Paul talks about kind of our life, our Christian life, our discipleship, and he uses the terms of sacrifices. We offer our bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. It's our spiritual act of worship. And I wonder, if we're honest with ourselves sometimes, we are guilty of giving God gifts that don't cost us anything, because they're the easiest kind of gifts to give. We're very quick to offer up the things that we won't miss, the things that we were done with anyways, the things that we maybe wanted to get rid of, and this is as good an excuse as any, or the leftovers. Give God those things. And ultimately, we're doing what David refused to do. We're giving God a gift that doesn't really cost us anything. And there is a cost, Jesus says, to being a disciple, to following. That shows up in a lot of different ways, and I don't think we need to kind of belabor it or go through them all. I read something this week that was really impacting, I guess, on me. Someone was talking about for lack of a better term, things that Christians like to argue about in public. The battles that we choose to wage. And this person said, if we're honest, when we think about those things that we decide are worth arguing about and the things that we decide are not, we target people on the kind of other side of the political spectrum. We focus on things like culture, wars, and identity politics, instead of addressing things like pride and greed and abuse within the church, because, this person said, one of those battles costs us nothing, and the other one will cost us absolutely everything. We give God things that don't cost us anything, but that's not discipleship, because discipleship will always cost something. If he was here, I'd pick on him. Jimmy Colford is the one of the best drummers I've ever seen. If you're watching this, buddy, you're great. He's very, very good. I know several of y'all went out and celebrating the birthday, saw him on Friday playing. I love watching him play. I love watching him do it. He's just so good. I love on his social media, you'll see, we're here or there, he's setting up for things. But one of the things that I love, and he's not the only person that does this, but he's the one I guess see do it most often, is every once in a while I'll see a picture of his practice pad on his dining room table. He'll take a picture, say, putting in the work. Because Jimmy, and a lot of musicians maybe understand this, a lot of people who are good at anything understand that if you're not getting better, you're getting worse. The reason he's so good at that, the reason a lot of people, professional musicians or whatever, are so good at what they do is because they're working at it. They're continuing to pour in, they're continuing to take steps, they're continuing to move forward. Because they know if they're not getting better, they're getting worse. You're never done. There's always room to move, to progress, to take another step forward. So in Revelation, at the very beginning of the book, chapter 2 and 3, there are 7 letters in those 2 chapters to different churches. They're pretty short. The angel of the Lord says these things to the church in wherever. And one of those letters is to a church in Laodicea, which is in Western Turkey, was in Western Turkey. And among other things, this is what that letter says to the church in Laodicea. In Revelation 3:15-16, I know your deeds, that you are neither cold nor hot. I wish you were either one or the other. So because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I'm about to spit you out of my mouth. In one of the recent, I guess, boogeymen, if you want to call it that, in the kind of evangelical discourse is deconstruction. I don't know if you've heard this term, deconstruction. It's the term used for people who have started to question things about their faith upbringing. And a lot of times, at least the way it gets talked about, a deconstruction is the first step in kind of running away from the church. And I've got to tell you, that's not been my experience. You hear people talk about kids going off to college and they, get their heads filled with all these crazy ideas and then they run away. I spend an odd amount of time with those kids teaching an intro to Christian theology class. And what I see more often than not is not kids who are looking for an excuse to leave faith or looking for an excuse to walk away from the morality that their parents taught them. I see kids who are asking honest questions because they want to more fully and more honestly engage with faith. They want to know why. And they ask questions because those answers help us progress. They help us move forward and they help us to grow. They help us make faith our own thing. And I wonder if maybe a lot of them who do leave faith do it because we're not always very good with questions. A guy I kind of know tangentially said that he grew up in a church that was a lot better at giving you answers than helping you with questions. And man, that was so powerful to think about. We see people ask questions and we say, well, you're just supposed to believe it, hush up and move. And that's why people leave. Sometimes people ask hard questions about faith, and sometimes those questions are really difficult, and sometimes that even means they will take a step in the wrong direction. But that is better than sitting still, which is what I think this is. I would rather that you were cold or hot. Don't just sit in the middle. Do something. Sometimes taking a step backwards is what you need to do to get where you're supposed to go. Sometimes you need the perspective that it can offer. But if we want to be more committed, Jesus followers, we have to move. We can't just stand still. There is a cost. And part of the cost is that we always need to ask ourselves, what is next? What are the next steps that I need to take? And we're going to spend several weeks talking about it. But before we jumped into that, I wanted to remind us that when we talk about discipleship, there is a cost. It's not a freebie. It's not a punch card. When you get it all filled up, you're set for life. There will always be a next thing, always a next step. Sometimes, maybe you've said it before, Jim. I know you've probably heard someone say it. You get people after services, I feel like that sermon was aimed directly at me. We don't do it on purpose, usually. And if you've heard anything that I said and you feel kind of targeted or you feel discouraged, I don't want you to feel discouraged. If you have just accepted the message of Jesus' free gift, and you haven't gotten to the cost part yet, if you've been content with giving what is easy instead of really seeking what God may want for you to give, the things that might disrupt or, God forbid, transform your life, if you've been sitting in the same place for a lot of years because it's comfortable there and you haven't taken steps in a while, if you feel like you're walking backwards, do not be discouraged. That's great. I'm glad you're there. I don't want you to stay there. This is the point. You have to take the next step. Don't be discouraged that you are where you are, but don't stay there either. Take the next step, and then the next one, then the next one, and watch what God does with our lives. Watch what he does with our families. Watch what he does with our communities. Watch what he does with our church.